You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So in the last couple of episodes I've been talking about burnout, and I want to do a deep dive into the causes of burnout. Now for those of you who've been loyal listeners to my podcast, you'll have heard me talk about Philip Zimbardo's sort of framework about, what underlies certain behaviours. And in his case, the thing that he was looking at was what gets people to do bad things. Okay, so in a really simple sense, think Abu Ghraib. I mean, not that it was simple, but it was quite complex. But therein lies the ordinary soldier who actually finds themselves in a situation where they do horrendous things to other human beings. Now, I want to take that structure that he put up, which is that for some people it's dispositional. Other people find themselves in certain circumstances, i.e. it's situational. And then there's the issue of the system itself that predisposes often people doing things that are inherently bad. Okay, so you're probably sort of scratching your head going, well, hang on a minute, how does that work with burnout? Well, let me put it together in a particular way. So let's make the assumption that burnout is our reaction to both external and internal expectations and demands that become increasingly more difficult for the individual to operate with and get results from. Okay, so as I said, this doesn't necessarily just happen in jobs where you've got a difficult interpersonal relationship scenario like teaching or medicine or psychiatry or psychology. But rather we're talking about burnout in many different other fields like personal relationships. But I want to focus on probably what I see as the most common issue, and that is what is actually happening for people when they're burning out at work, when they're not in a job like health, medicine, psychology, psychiatry, teaching, paramedics, fireys. Okay, so let's start off with just lifting those jobs out for a moment, where all of us can agree that they're confronted with some pretty difficult stuff. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Okay? So I want you to picture disposition as a circle, situation as a circle, and systemic as a circle. And now with those three, I want you to create a Venn diagram. Okay? And in the middle is the potential for burnout. Okay? Or you can actually say when all of these things intersect in the right way, then we actually begin to see people going into burnout. Now, a friend of mine and I were having an interesting discussion recently about issues about leadership, management, and especially corporate governance. I think that we don't necessarily reflect a lot on it. I mean, the other day I saw something on Facebook wherein, Silicon Valley CEOs were talking about taking a leaf out of Elon Musk's leadership style. And my immediate reaction was, apart from laughing, was that I went, hang on a minute. If you want to create a toxic environment, that's exactly what you'll do. You'll become an Elon Musk. But the question is more important about what can good governance, what can good leadership do to, in a sense, have an impact on preventing burnout? Because there is a connection. It's not just because people are not resilient that they get burned out. A lot of people that I've worked with who've been burned out, doesn't matter from which walk of professional walk they've come from, a lot of them are actually highly resilient. They're not, the sort of psychological walking wounded. They become psychologically wounded in the process. So what I want to do in this particular podcast is I want to run through what I believe to be some of the core principles where corporate governance can help prevent burnout within an organisation. Okay, so let me give you a list to begin with. Okay, so first things first, set clear expectations. Second thing, ensure fair compensation. Thirdly, provide a supportive work environment. Then encourage open communication. And last but not least, promote ethical behaviour. Now let me go into this a little bit more, because essentially what I'm going to argue is that if we see dispositional and situational as far less important than the system structure, then we can actually influence a great deal in the positive direction. Okay, so what do I mean by setting clear expectations? Well, one of the important aspects in leadership is that we come to the table with a strong sense of a vision. And my argument always is that this is a long-term vision. So part of that vision is, what are my expectations for myself, for my teams, from the workforce as a whole? And this really distills down into everybody's roles and responsibilities. For example, an organisation can establish clear job descriptions that outline the specific duties and responsibilities of each role. This can help employees to understand what's expected of them and reduce uncertainty and prevent overload. But the important thing is, solid leadership isn't going to change the goalposts somewhere along the line. Managers are not going to transgress what's agreed on, and suddenly, especially in times of redundancies, where a person's had a job, another person's had a job, one person is made redundant, and the other person finds themselves in a situation where they're now doing two jobs, right? Which then leads me on to the whole issue about ensuring fair compensation. Because in that redundancy example, I will put money on the fact that the last man standing, or the last person standing, isn't going to get double the salary. They might be doing the work of two jobs, but he's not going to get, or she's not going to get paid more. When people feel that they're being fairly compensated for their work, they're more likely to feel motivated and engaged. Their sense of job satisfaction increases. They will be more committed. They will go above and beyond when necessary. Also, fair compensation can help foster a sense of trust between employees, management, and leadership. So again, all that's going to go into creating greater job satisfaction and commitment. So really, really important stuff. The other part to this is the next point that I was making earlier on, is that, in corporate governance, one of the things I want to look at is how to provide a supportive work environment. Okay? So what does that mean? Right? Essentially, I'm going to, as a corporate leader, put stuff into place that is going to foster my employees' well-being, not detract from it. When I was the health service manager in the public service in an organisation, one of the things that I put into place were employee assistance programs, trauma debriefing programs, looking at effective return to work programs when there's people being injured and on rehabilitation. So we had rehabilitation consultants coming in. So a whole range of things were put into place that supported the worker, who admittedly often had very difficult work environments. And so that created a sense that people thought the organisation cared. And not only did they need to think that, but we demonstrated that we did care for the worker. So one of the other things that we could do to provide a supportive work environment is parental leave, telecommuting options, or flexible scheduling to help employees work through the balance, the conflicts between work and personal responsibilities. Now, as a manager, I don't want to be my employee's psychologist, but I want to be there knowing what's going on for them. And in what way can I, as a manager within the system, provide the necessary support mechanisms, the strategies, the tools, the networks? And also, I'm going to really work on the relationship. So, vision, values, and relationships. Because in a lot of ways, I can argue that all of this is a values-based process. The next thing that I think is fundamentally important is encouraging open communication. In too many organisations that I've seen and worked in or helped, one of the things that often stands out is the level of dysfunctional communication. So trust is low. Cooperation is politicized, i.e., it's basically transactional. I'll only help you if you help me. And there will be times when I don't want you to get far, so I'm going to set you up to fail. My wife and I are watching an interesting program at the moment called The Recruit. Young 24-year-old lawyer joins the CIA. Very good in terms of people skills and thinking things through, but naive when it comes to the political system within the CIA. And so, he makes a silk purse out of really shitty situations, but he gets caught out too, right? So partly the problem is that communication is fundamentally used and abused. Right? So what do I mean by open communication between employees and management? Well, we need to be able to identify personal and potential sources of stress, and we need to be then able to take a position of creating early intervention to prevent burnout. It's a targeted thing. So an organisation might conduct regular employee surveys or hold regular town hall meetings to solicit feedback from employees. But as good as they are, I can't ever think of anything better than sitting down as a manager with my team, getting them to give me feedback, and I go back to my management team, give them feedback, and then we take it to the executive. It's clean and immediate. So the last issue, I think, and this is one that, God, is so often completely neglected, whether that's in organisations or whether it's in politics, is promoting ethical behaviour. So how's that going to help prevent burnout? Well, firstly, if we focus on ethical behaviour, we're creating a culture, a values-based culture of integrity within the organisation. When employees feel that their organisation operates ethically and with integrity, they are more likely to feel engaged, motivated, and focused. Why? Because it helps reduce feelings of disillusionment and disengagement. You become cynical in organisations like that. You go, what's the point? And so you let things go. You quietly quit. You create your own little bubble that you can survive in. And that reduction of energy amplifies. It's like a virus that suddenly begins to run through the organisation. And so this is particularly important at a time when we're looking to increase engagement, when we're looking to be more inclusive, when we're looking at getting people to share more with each other in their teams. And not only that, but also taking care of, stakeholders and shareholders. Now, a lot of us don't have a lot to do with shareholders, but we can certainly work better and more ethically with stakeholders. Every organisation in my book needs to have a clearly established code of ethics that outlines the expectations for ethical behaviour and provides guidance for employees facing ethical dilemmas. And rewards and repercussions need to be immediate. They need to be swift. Yes, we need to go through a process of investigation and it needs to be impartial, but we can't drag stuff out. In Australia, New South Wales, a particular premier has been investigated for questions of conduct, and so is a partner. And, there still isn't a clear answer to what the outcome was for that. Now, if I was in the public service, political or non-political, I'd be annoyed at best, really shitty with the system, and quite disillusioned because I'd be going, well, there's one set of rules for this person, lower down the rung of the pecking order, and the elites are protected. Now, you can see how that's going to get to me eventually to the point where I couldn't give a fuck. But that eats away at me, not the organisation. And so in order to protect myself, the question that arises is, what do I do? And this is where I think if we stop thinking individualistically and think of us as a community, that the voices can make change, but it often starts with one voice that then gets another voice and another voice. And eventually we are the many, and the many become powerful. Israel is going through a massive, massive upheaval at the moment because the leadership has taken upon itself to undermine secular democratic principles. And guess what? It's not washing really well, and so it shouldn't. And so many of us in many different countries, the UK, Australia, the United States, Israel, everywhere, we need to look at our individual well-being connected to the greater good. As Aristotle said very clearly. So, I hope this has been interesting. I'm going to challenge you, as I always do. Think about this. Look at what you can do to make a difference. Because all of us can do something. It may be very little, or it may be a great deal. So until next time, this is me signing off. Please encourage other people to think. Think critically, but think also with gratitude and compassion and a fundamental set of values that is going to instill in all of us a sense of moving towards well-being. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.